Welcome to Visual Anthology. In this series of videos, we've been talking about the book fair module. We've already gone through a basic overview showing you how to create a new book fair, adding items to that using a few different methods, checking out that book fair, and actually sending a few extra copies. At this point, I'd like to show you how to deal with the return, coming back home and marking what all sold, getting your inventory on hands to reduce, and also showing you how you might deal with items that are being sent back to the store, things that didn't sell, and possibly things that you have a shortage of. So we'll go back to our book fair, and we were working on book fair number 5. You'll see that it has a status of open, and we can go to the details. And just to point out again, we sent a certain quantity of every title on this list, and there's also what's considered to be the out value as well, because in the case of this title, the Oracle title, we had originally only sent 1, but we added 5 more after they called us in the middle of the day asking for a few more copies. So we want to deal with the return. There's a few different methods to handle that. Everybody has their preference. It may also depend on really how many you sold. One method is to simply manually mark how many quantities were returned versus or how many were sold. Another method is to use scan mode to actually scan in the quantities being returned. And a third method is to use batch mode, where you're actually using sort of a quicker module to scan in those quantities. That might be something you do with a really large event where a lot of items are coming back and you need multiple machines to be working on the different piles of books. Why don't we start with the really simple one where we're just kind of manually doing things. Before we get into that though, there's a really important set of options that you need to understand and need to be aware of. They'll greatly affect what you are and are not able to do at any given time in this open book fair. The concept of being able to mark the quantity returned or the quantity sold. And by returned, I mean the items coming back to your store that didn't sell, not vendor returns in this case. The ability to mark that field is controlled by a certain status. You need to decide at this stage, when you're first coming back home, what is it that you're more concerned with marking? What would be easier to mark? Would it be easier to mark in everything is sold and just mark the few that didn't sell? Or would it be easier to mark everything as returned, hopefully not, and mark the 1 or 2 that did sell? It really depends on your particular situation and how well that event did. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, you'll notice that the on-site, return, and sold fields are all enabled. I could really pick any one of those and start changing that for any of these items. However, once I start doing that, I'm going to lock myself into, and the program's going to do this for me, or it's going to make me do this. I'm going to end up locking myself into a certain mode. I will only be able to edit the return quantities, or the sold quantities, or if this is an ongoing event, the on-site quantities. That's because we want you to mark one value and let the system calculate the rest. So, as before, in say the case of this item, I sent 5, but what if they only send 3 back? Well, to me, that means that I must have sold 2, or rather, they must have sold 2. So, if I'm going to be marking in the quantity as physically returned, I want the machine to calculate what it thinks should have been sold. Now, there's a question of dealing with shortages, things that didn't sell, they didn't get any money for, but you didn't get your book back. So that's another question we'll answer a little bit further down the line. But for right now, I want you to be aware of the fact that once you start changing these fields, you're going to lock yourself into either changing the on-site, the return, or the sold. You can't change a mix of all 3 in the same book fair. Now, you can actually choose your mode ahead of time by going to your Actions menu, and here's those different modes. Now, in this case, we say Update on Hand, but we really mean the on-site, or Update Returned, or Update Sold. So I should really choose what mode I'm going to use first. Now, let's say that this book fair did pretty well, and there really are only one or two titles physically coming back to the store, and the rest sold out. So, to make this a little easier, the first thing I want to do is say update return. Notice that all of a sudden I no longer can change the on-site field or the sold field. All I can change is the return field. If I were to start changing this item right now, the system would want to try to calculate the sold value for me. But I can actually do something where instead of making the system calculate only as I enter each item being returned, I can actually sort of make it calculate on the fly a little bit faster. This is sort of a good way to do it. And this is actually the way I recommend everybody do it. So I've already gone in and I've chosen my mode of update return. Now I'm going to say, you know what, pretty much everything's sold out. So I'll say just assume that everything's sold. Now it's going to bring up a little message saying, wait a minute, do you mean that anything you haven't touched already should just automatically take whatever's in the out column and automatically put it in the sold column? That is what I want to do here, so I'll say yes. And you'll notice now everything is marked as sold. But I'm not done yet. I haven't really started to open those boxes of the items coming back yet. So again, I went to Actions, I did Update Returned, and then I did Sold All. Now I'm going to do my third step, which is to actually start allowing me to start scanning in those items that did come back. So to do that, I'll do one more action menu item, which is to go up to the action menus and choose Turn on Scan Mode. By doing that, I've locked myself into Return Update mode. I've forced the system to automatically assume that there's all of them sold out, and now I'm going to start scanning in the few copies that did come back home. Notice by doing that, those three steps of update return, sold all, turn on scan mode, those three critical steps, by doing that, I've forced the system to automatically calculate as soon as I mark an item as returned that there's still two left that should have been sold. Well, perhaps I did get a second copy back. So again, I'll scan in that item. And now the system has calculated, okay, you returned 2, you sent 3, so there must have been 1 sold. So that pattern can continue with all these other items. Perhaps I sold pretty much everything but one of these King of the Mild Frontier books. And perhaps I sold out of another one here. Let's say the Dreamweaver title. So you're seeing that as I'm scanning each one, that number is rolling and calculating each occurrence to hopefully get to the point where I've scanned every single copy. And in this case, perhaps I didn't sell any of that title. So there I go. I scanned that item 5 times. I had originally sent 5. I didn't add any more, so there were 5 out to begin with. I had originally also said here that I had sold out, but because of doing the scan mode, I've now said that I've returned all 5 copies and that, in fact, none sold of that item. Again, don't forget to save every so often. So at this point, I'm in return update mode. Notice it shows that up here. I've scanned in the few copies that I have returned, and really I could continue on from here. But perhaps I am working on a rather large pile of books, and I want my staff to sort of break it up and each person take a pile of books and go to their own machine. To handle that, we've added this batch entry mode option. This is what I showed you when we were creating the draft book fair. It can be used on the return side as well. So let's go back a step here. So I've got my open book fair. It's already in return mode, and it does have to be in return mode for this batch entry mode option to be available. If I want to break this pile up and give each person their stack of books to start scanning in the returns, I can go to my details menu, go to actions, and do batch entry mode. That again turns into that very simple, very fast screen, so I could start scanning in at my own personal machine the pile of books that I was given. So we'll say that I've got 2 copies of this title to be returned. I could go through and scan the rest of the items being returned as well. F10 to save it, and again F12 to commit, or to add those items, or rather subtract those items from the amounts that I thought had sold. So I'll say yes to commit it, and we said we did 2 quantities of the Angels Wear title came back. So again, there's a historical record of what I did, but again, the green record is the last known, the master record of what was going on. So if I go to this open version of Book Fair number 5, I'll see that there indeed are the 2 copies I had scanned in batch mode to say that they were returned. That's about it for this section. The next video will be on sort of taking tenders, wrapping up, dealing with any discrepancies.